So very brief introduction to woodcock and woodcock habitat. So woodcock are a small migratory game bird. Maryland lies in a kind of an interesting area where we've got both breeding woodcock, and it's a real migratory area where, especially on the Eastern Shore, we get a ton of birds stopping there as they migrate from more northern areas. But the highest densities of breeding woodcock are found in the western part of the state. They're ground dwelling, which is important. You know, it's just something you need to realize, like all these ground dwelling birds, habitat is super important, and that's going to be a theme throughout the day, I'm sure. They need that overhead concealment cover from predators, but yet open enough that they can move around. Soils are a big thing with woodcock. They're somewhat different than some of our other game birds in that they need moist soils. They use that beak to build a probe into the soil and primarily feed on earthworms, although they also feed on other items as well. And unlike grouse, they will fly back and forth from their feeding to roosting areas, singing grounds. So there is a little advantage for maybe smaller landowners where you don't have to provide all the things that the species needs on a small area. You could maybe provide a portion of their habitat needs, but these birds might be using an adjacent property that might be a mile or 2 miles away. So like grouse, woodcock are declining, maybe not quite as severely. In the east there, you can see they've declined about 1% per year. Our respective states that we probably have folks here from are listed down below there. And the southern 3 states are not doing as well. Pennsylvania, good job, Raina. Is that hopefully that little uptick there is from you. Yeah, they're doing a little better, but in general, quail are woodcock are declining. You can tell I talked about quail a lot. Woodcock are declining over time. And like these other species, they're an early successional species. Again, that probably will be a theme throughout the day. But essentially, after about 15 or 20 years, the habitat becomes unsuitable for woodcock. They're not going to use it very much, you know, just to kind of simplify things. But they'll use those earlier stages of succession for various habitat needs. We'll just kind of go through those real briefly. This is kind of your diurnal habitat, you know, where they're going to be during the daytime. Feeding primarily. These are early successional habitats with moist soils, and similar to grouse, high stem density is the key. You know, it has to be thick. It has to you know, provide that cover for these birds that are just not going to use it. Some typical examples are, you know, recent clear cuts, areas with young saplings and shrubs, overgrown orchards, things like that are going to be the areas that woodcock use. They're a little bit different than some of our other game birds in that they use their specific areas for roosting. So they're actually going to fly to these roosting fields or roosting, you know, sites to spend the night. And it's typically going to be larger fields. Sometimes they're in smaller openings, but typically it's areas that are greater than 3 acres. Things like hay fields, pastures, harvested crop fields. Honestly, I haven't seen that they're that specific about where they want to be, but it's got to be an opening. Sometimes you'll have knee-high vegetation there. Sometimes it'll be very short mowed grass. But this is an important habitat component that they need to have near their feeding areas within a few miles. Singing grounds are another kind of unique habitat type that's unique to woodcock. So they do a very really cool what they're calling a sky dance, where they do an aerial display. The males will do this courtship display in the spring. It's really neat if you haven't seen it. They will do this pattern, land, and then they'll make a specific call that's very distinctive. Once you know it, they call it a peep. Should have a little audio clip of that. But they'll do this in smaller clearings that are next to feeding areas. So they're basically doing this display, trying to attract females in the nearby areas, diurnal habitat. Okay, and then putting it all together, you've got, ideally you'd have a setup like this where you've got, all three of these habitat components in a relatively small area. Obviously, some work's been done here to create that perfect scenario. So when it comes to things that you can do to provide habitat for woodcock, first thing you need to think about is the site, and that's where, it's what you have there will really dictate whether you have the capability to manage for woodcock or not. Because if it's all steep, rocky slopes, chances are it's not going to be decent woodcock habitat. So you need to be looking at slopes that are areas that are a little flatter. They have moist soils, but not saturated. It's not a wetland bird. They just like moist soils. And then you can look at various species, just anything that likes those wetter soils will give you an idea if there's potential there to manage for habitat, woodcock habitat. Forest management can obviously be important to provide this kind of early successional structure. Won't go into the details on the various silvicultural techniques, but you can do commercial harvest. You can also do non-commercial types of mechanical treatments like the skid steer grinder head, grind mature trees and try to set it back and create that regeneration. And generally smaller strips or smaller blocks, doing that on a rotation is going to be better than extensive large scale clear cuts. Okay, when you're thinking about managing these openings, whether they're roosting fields or singing grounds, maintaining those with a variety of methods, mowing, fire, disking can all work, all have their pros and cons. And think about after you do some timber harvest, using those log landings and those openings that have been created, maintaining those in those openings that woodcock use will be good to diversify that habitat. Just a couple other considerations. As always, when you're putting sunlight on the ground, invasive plants and shrubs are potentially a problem, depending what you have. So addressing those early and often is really important to make sure that they don't dominate that stand and negate the benefits that you're trying to provide. And then just kind of a catch-all, I think Brandon had something like this, this soft edge idea can help a lot of wildlife. So, down there on the bottom, this landowner went in there, created some soft edges, like felling some trees, doing some herbicide work, and woodcock are there, a lot of suite of songbirds, and just generally going to help wildlife. And that's all I got. Hopefully I didn't take up all of our time.